This is going to be fairly casual. I've done this talk before, but I always try to focus on the group that I'm talking to, and I do want it to be a little bit interactive. And so before I start and introduce myself and go into the presentation, I wanted to get a sense of, and you can, since people aren't on screen, maybe you can do it in the comments. Is there anyone here who is currently in their PD1 journey? They're studying, they've scheduled it, or maybe they've even taken the test once or twice. I know people who have taken it 5 times. Is there anybody who's in the midst of PD1, or are most people just like, that sounds interesting, maybe I'll take PD1 on? I'm interested in getting where you're at in your thought process is my first question. So we'll just take a minute for that, and then I have a follow-up question.
Are you able to see the chat, Janet, or you want me to?
I am, yeah.
Okay.
+1 for Rad Women Code. I'll definitely talk about that. That was the catalyst for me. Anybody else not interested? Oh, interested. Okay, good. Ankit, it sounds like you've been doing some preparation. Yes, it does take a lot, and I'll definitely talk about that. Nice, yeah. Ooh, nice, yeah. Oh, good. So it looks like, we have an audience of people who are either in the middle of it or thinking about starting it. And so this is a perfect time for me to go over these topics with you. I'm just reading the comments. So my next question for you is, and then we'll get going. If you've thought about PD1, what about it? Or if you haven't signed up yet, you haven't started the journey, what's stopping you? Like, what in your mind is stopping you from sort of taking it on? And if you've started to take it on, what's the most intimidating thing about it? Like, why is it such a roadblock for some people to sort of get started with it? I'm interested in your insights there. The coding part for sure. Definitely going to talk about that. Oh, LWCs, yeah. I'm not an expert, so I'll talk about that a little bit as to how. Yeah, development part. Okay, perfect. Okay, I'm definitely going to cover some of this, and I hope that I can encourage you to take it on and sort of start down the path. And I'm going to talk a little bit about so it was a year and a half ago I took the test. It may have changed a little bit, but I'm going to talk about my journey a little bit and sort of demystify things for you a little bit in taking it on. Let me just read this last comment. Oh, perfect. I'm definitely going to talk about that. Definitely going to talk about what the best preparation is. Okay, awesome. So I will go ahead and share my screen. See if I'm doing this properly. Bear with me. Yes, oh there, share. And let's see, can everyone see? I'll put it in presentation mode here in a second, but can everybody see my screen right now?
Yes, Janet, we can see.
Okay, thank you for bearing with me. I'm not a professional. Okay, do you see the first slide?
The slide didn't come up ahead. Maybe that's
maybe. Do I have to share if it? So it's not showing the presentation mode. Maybe I have to share it in presentation mode.
Yeah,
so hold on.
Desktop, nothing else.
Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let me. I'm going to stop share. I'm going to put this in presentation mode and then share the screen. I think that's what's going to work better. Let's try this. Is that better?
Good. Yeah, it's good.
Okay. So just title slide. This is a presentation I developed. It was about a year and a half ago, called 0 to PD1, and motivation, mindset, mastery, and mentor. And I'll stop here and talk a little bit about why I focused on this. When I looked back at my PD1 journey, for me personally, it was a little bit less about the technical, and it was a little bit more about like, how do I stick with this? I'm confused, I'm frustrated, I want to stop doing this. Why am I doing this? What mindset did I need to have to stick with it? And then some tips and tricks on mastery, and then the importance of a mentor.
Hello. Aiko.
I think we need to mute. Oh, I think I can mute. There we go. So a little bit about me. Sorry, this slide has a lot of stuff on it. I'm a senior solution architect at a Salesforce partner called Kicksaw. We're fully remote. I put my email address there, and also Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter and LinkedIn, so I'd love to connect with you there. I'm 9 times certified now. Last certification I took was Sales Cloud Consultant. Now that I'm in consulting, I was in-house before. I'm going through and trying to get the consultant certifications. I lead the Sacramento Women in Tech group, co-founded Sacramento Salesforce Saturday. We're 2 years in on that, and Platform Champion alumni. They canceled the Platform Champion program, but I was an alumni. That was a great program to be involved in. And then most recently, so fun, I was involved in a taping for a Salesforce Plus show called Legends of Low Code. It's a reality show of 3 teams that are competing to build a low code app for a nonprofit over 2 days. Super fun thing to be involved with, and I think it's supposed to come out in January. So definitely look for that, and really excited for that to come out. So now let's get into the heart of things here. I feel really strongly that PD1 is a really important certification. It's sort of a foundational certification for sort of going into that next level. So PD1 is important because you might be starting from a non-technical background. I don't have any coding experience. And so I started it with a coding background. I don't have a computer science degree or anything like that. So you can start from a non-technical background. I think it's important because it's the fundamental concepts to understand the platform, regardless of your role. And I'll talk about that a little later on. To me, it's not just a certification because you want to become a developer. I don't want to be a developer. I wanted to be an architect. And I also, at the time, was a project manager working with the development team. And I wanted to better understand what we were talking about. I didn't need to know how to sit down and write a trigger because that wasn't my job, but I needed to be able to discuss it with them and understand it. So that's one of the reasons I think it's important. The PD1, so if you didn't have the PD1 certification available and you're like, I want to learn how to code and just know more about the platform, like there's so much scattered information, you would not know where to start. So the awesome thing about PD1 is it provides that framework for you. When you look at the exam guide, it lays out all the different areas, and it's not just coding. It really provides the framework for you to level up to that next level of understanding. So that is awesome about PD1. And with PD1, it's the journey, not the destination. I know there's a big push in Salesforce world to have certifications, and that's great. But it's not about getting the certification. It's about everything you're learning along the way. A lot of this is net new information, and also the confidence you're going to build by doing this. So that's why I think PD1 is a super important certification, not just for developers, for every role that's available. So my first sort of benchmark, my first guidepost here is motivation. This was big for me, and so that's why I wanted to talk about it with other people. You can't, it depends on why do you want to take PD1? Are you getting pressure from internal, like to get your job, to get another certification, or to become a developer, or some sort of pressure? Or is it within yourself that you want to do it? For me, there was no reason in my job that I had at the time to get PD1. There was no push for me to become a developer. There was no push for me to learn additional stuff. I was just sort of at a standstill in my development, career development, technical development. And so I wanted to pursue it. So as a couple other people have mentioned, I was part of Rad Women Code, and that absolutely gave me the confidence that I could take it on. It was sort of started that bug in my ear that maybe I should try to do this. So you need to understand where you are coming from and what is motivating you, because that's what's going to help you stay the course. If you're simply doing it, you don't really have a passion for it, or you don't want to dive into some of the technical details and use them later, that lack of motivation or that lack of understanding why you want to take it is going to hurt you later on when things become more difficult. It's going to prevent you from sort of staying the course. Number 2 is you have to be realistic about your background, that it supports the journey. I think one of the questions was, what's the path? If you're just starting from scratch, you don't have any certifications. I definitely recommend that you have admin and platform app builder at the very least. Those are the 2 that are going to provide you the basics, because not a lot of the test, but a small part of the test is on declarative development. It is clicks, not code. And so you not only need to know the ins and outs of that, but also just understand how Salesforce works. Some of the questions, you may not know the exact answer, but because you've been around Salesforce, you've taken some certification exams, you understand where things are going. There's a certain way that Salesforce approaches things. So be realistic that you have the underlying expertise and experience to take it on. For Rad Women Code, they won't let you in unless you have at least 2 years of work experience with Salesforce, and I would highly recommend that. It would be really hard to take this test on without a couple years of experience and a couple of certifications under your belt. Additionally, what helped me is I worked with a team of developers. So it wouldn't be impossible. I think it would be hard for like a solo admin who doesn't work with development at all. It's just going to be harder because you haven't been exposed to some of the language that's involved in PD1. And the third one is to define your end game. What is your goal for taking it? For me, I had a clear goal that I wanted to pass it, and I wanted to take on the application architect side of the pyramid. Having that goal is what sort of pushed me forward, because as I'll talk about, there's definitely points of frustration with this where, you know what, it's a lot of work. It took time away from my family. And so there's a little bit of a journey of ups and downs going through it, trying to learn things that I wasn't familiar with, but having that end goal in mind is really going to keep you moving forward. So it's important to define that, like, why are you taking this on? So why would you take it on? There's a lot of different reasons. So I've told you what my reason was for taking it on, but I think, as I've said before, that PD1 encompasses all roles. So maybe you're looking to transition to become a developer. You want to be a full-time developer, you want to code, you absolutely need to understand the topics for PD1. Maybe like myself, you're on a journey to become an architect. So architects, and it depends what company you work for, don't necessarily need to know how to code, but they need to be able to discuss it. They need to be able to architect when that's necessary versus clicks over code. So it's important in that journey. Maybe you just want to better understand the platform as an admin. You want to level up as an admin and understand things like order of operation and some of the limits and how to use the dev console. Those things are all super helpful for an admin, and you don't have to be a developer to use them. Or in my case at the time, maybe you're a business analyst or a project manager and you're happy in that role, but you want to be able to better understand what's going on in your projects. For me as a project manager, I would write technical specifications, hand them over to the developer, and then sometimes I wasn't able to understand why they were doing things one way or the other, or if I was QAing something, like why something didn't work. And I found that once I passed this certification and just understood generally a lot of the topics, it really leveled up my game as a project manager. So this is where I'm pointing out that it's not just a path to be a developer. I think it's a foundational certification. The next topic, I'll talk about this for a while, is mindset. We all have our different, right, we're all on different paths on our career journey, our Salesforce journey. And for me, so PD1 is not like other certifications. So I have 9 now, so I'm pretty familiar with the different certifications. There's the architect ones, consultant, they're all a little bit different. For me, having some experience, I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for over 10 years. You know, I've been around Salesforce for a while. But for me, it's not a linear journey. When I took on admin or platform app builder, I would get something like Focus on Force. I would look at the exam guide and I would just go down it. And I'd be like, I understand this. I need to look into this. I'm going to do a little bit of work on this. And I just went through and checked off the different topics. And some of them I was familiar with, but just needed to do a deeper dive. PD1 is not like that at all. So having that mindset going in and understanding that it's not just you, that that's how it is when you study it, just helps you understand that, right, like it's not just you, that's how it is. You're going to come across topics that you've never heard of before. And you're also going to come across topics that make zero sense when you first read them. You will read the words on the page and maybe you'll try and do a trailhead on it. And you're like, this is such an esoteric concept. I don't understand it. So you're not going to be able to go through the line items and just tick them off as you go. You are going to have a faith that as you go through it and you come back to it, and I'll talk about some of the different resources that you need to go to, you're going to layer that information on. And eventually, I had this happen down the road, you're going to read that again And because you've taken in this other information, maybe you've gone to some webinars, you've talked to some people, you're going to have a eureka moment where it clicks. But don't expect that up front, and just know that that's normal. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable. This is huge, and it kind of has to do with this thing where it's not linear. You're going to come across things that you're not familiar with. You're going to have to set them aside. You're going to have to go to something else. You're going to have to come back. You're going to have to decide, like, how am I going to understand this? I need to ask somebody. I need to go do a badge. I need to go to Trailhead Live. How am I going to understand this? But don't be frustrated by that. We all go through that. There's going to be things that you don't understand. And I guess I want to make a big point of, don't let that sidetrack your PD1 journey. Don't get to something that's really vague and hard and just say, oh, this isn't for me. This is too hard. I'm not going to do this. If you find the right resource to explain it to you, maybe it's a mentor, like I said, maybe it's a webinar, you absolutely will have a eureka moment. It's all understandable in chunks, but just know that there are things you're not going to understand right away, and that's totally fine. So here are some tips for approaching it. So it's all well and good for me to tell people, like, PD1's awesome, you should go and check it out. Like, just start that PD1 journey. But it's super intimidating. Like, where do you start? How do you even start to layer the information? So the way that I approached it was, this is how I approached it. So first, you need to be comfortable with the declarative things, platform app builder type of things, configuration, data model, process automation. There are going to be questions about this. So this you need to understand before you move on, or it's going to be a lot harder. So make sure you've got the declarative down, you feel comfortable with that. I felt really comfortable in that part. So I sort of reviewed that material, checked it off, and like, okay, I'm good with that. Let's move to the next level. For me, the next level was Rad Women Code. And Rad Women Code starts out very basic, talking about data types and variables, just starting to talk about the building blocks of code. And that's what helped to demystify it for me. It wasn't like, here's all this information that you need to understand. They broke it down very simply. And I'll talk about some of those resources. So understanding data types, triggers, methods, classes, and loops. This is really the coding chunk of the test. And it's not all about code. I guess that's what I want to emphasize. You are not going to have to sit and write a trigger. You are not going to have to write a test class and run something and debug it. It's multiple choice. So you're going to have to understand the parts of code, the parts of a trigger, what a class is, what a method is, and you will have had to have some hands-on experience with it through some of the resources I'll tell you. But you don't have to get to the level where you're writing code on a blank screen. That is not what this test is about. So I hope that that helps demystify that part, because only a portion of the test is about code. So once you are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, and again, I'll talk about some resources with, oh, what are data types? Okay, triggers, what are the different parts of a trigger? Methods, classes, why would I do a loop? Don't include DML in your loop, just little tips like that. You're like, okay, I'm not afraid of code anymore. Maybe I can't sit down and write a trigger. That's okay. I'm starting to understand some of the pieces of it, and I can take that and maybe apply it to, you know, my daily work, some of that information. So you're starting to feel a little more comfortable. Maybe you're not an expert at this, but you're starting to feel a little bit more comfortable with, like, you're not afraid to look at a trigger now and start to dissect it. Then, so the rest of this is all the other stuff. So there's a lot of other stuff besides code. The next level here is how I would suggest approaching it. Order of execution. So that's even gotten more complicated since I took the test. There's a bunch more stuff in there now, but you will find charts that show you the order of execution. You basically kind of have to memorize that, but in doing so, you're understanding, like, what is this before save doing? Is it committing it to the database or not? Why is the order of operation the way it is? That was huge for me to understand, because it helps with how you're approaching your automation, what your framework looks like, you know, your how many triggers per object? Should you just have one? Do you have a framework, your automation? It just goes into all of those decisions. So order of operation is staring at the chart, going through it, and understanding why it is the way it is, why it is the sequence that it is. There's several questions on that. SOCL, SOCL, and DML. That's a whole nother little study area just to become familiar with how to do SOCL queries. Why would you do them? What are the pieces of it? That's a nice little section that you can go off and study separately and just understand. You just need to practice it. And there are plenty of like little webinars about that and trailheads. So that piece, kind of ones and zeros, that you can start to understand how that language is and what DML is and how it works. Limits, that's just something you got to memorize. There's several things on here where as a developer, you're just going to Google it and you're going to be like, oh, what was the limit for this? You know, how many, it's 2000 or it's 500. There are going to be questions on the test where they give you a snippet of code. And then the answer is like, are you going to run into an error? What's going to happen when this code runs? That's really what the code questions are. Here's a snippet. What's going to happen? You might have to say, oh, it's going to error out because it's running more than 2,000 times, or it's going to be infinite because there's some DML in the loop. You need to know how to read what it's going to do and sort of put it into plain language. So knowing the limits, you just have to start to memorize what some of those are. Testing, debugging, and deployment. That was super interesting for me because I just hadn't been super involved in that. So understanding what tools are available for debugging, how to use the dev console and workbench, that's pretty approachable. You just have to get hands-on with it and run through some trailheads. And again, there's lots of resources for that. And just once you're hands-on and you open it up in your org and you start using it, you understand that it's, you know, it kind of demystifies it and it becomes a really handy tool for you to use. So I feel like this section in the middle here is the most straightforward, I guess I want to say. It doesn't involve abstract concepts. It's just getting your hands on there and doing it. And I'm hoping that talking about this, you understand that like the whole test isn't about code. So that's what's sort of awesome about it. Then this next layer here, for me, I worked a lot with Visualforce, which isn't as common anymore, but we did a lot of Visualforce work. I wasn't writing it, but I was exposed to it. Lightning components had just started becoming a thing when I studied for PD1. So I mean, I understood in concept like, okay, there's a Lightning web component and we're using that instead of Visualforce, but I don't really understand. Aura, there were questions about Aura. I don't know if that's being phased out, but there were some questions. And then, right, Lightning components and then LWCs, two separate things. This was the area for me where I was like, besides the coding part, I'm getting into a part where I haven't ever touched this stuff. So where do I go? I have to say that the Salesforce documentation is super helpful and is very approachable. It's not overly technical and it breaks it down. So for like LWCs, there's certain components, there's certain things you need in LWC, like building blocks. So you learn about that. Maybe you go and build one or two simple LWCs. For me, that was as far as I had to go. I didn't have to spend weeks and weeks like truly understanding, coming to a blank page, how do I build a Lightning Web component? The test isn't going to test you on that. Sure, it's awesome to know if you're going to be a developer, but just as a threshold for deciding if you're going to take the test or not, you just have to understand the concept of LWCs. And then Visualforce with controllers, having to understand why you use certain controllers and how they work. So for me, this part was the most like heads down, trying to understand the concepts and build them myself enough to understand not only what the components are, but how they fit into the Salesforce world. Why would you use an LWC? Those are the kind of questions that are on the test. They aren't going to give you a blank page and say, go build one. It's going to be there and you're just going to have to understand the context of it. Like what other component do you need here to make this work? And again, it's laid out really well in the Salesforce documentation. And then the last section up here, again, not hard to understand, just sort of normal studying. System classes, it's a huge list of system classes. You just need to read over it. And as you're studying, certain ones will pop up over and over and you'll become familiar with which ones are more common. It's a little bit of a memorization, but you need to review those. Platform events, that's become even more of a thing now, talked about a lot more. There's definitely questions about that. But again, the Salesforce documentation is super helpful there, and you don't have to spend a lot of time, hands-on time with it. You do certainly need to spend a little bit to understand the parts of it, but it's a lot more theoretical that they're asking you about on the test. Security vulnerabilities. This is common in a lot of the different tests. Again, it's just understanding like what's cross-site scripting, just in theory. What is it, and how do you stop it from happening? That's pretty straightforward, and it's all laid out in the help documentation. And then this one's a little more vague, but best practices. The PD1 certification test and all of the tests are always going to ask you about best practices. And the best way to learn what best practices are is just keep your ears open, is what I want to say. Through your studying, you're going to read documentation. You're going to maybe do focus on force. You're going to maybe go to some webinars, and you'll continually hear the same things over and over. I mean, one of the obvious ones is don't include DML in a loop. It's just going to be, it's just going to be too many queries, and it's going to be infinite. So you'll start to hear the same things over and over. So just keep your ears open and start looking for patterns in the things that people talk about, best practices. When you're going through the material, they'll point them out. But again, you're going to start to see repeated ones, and they'll definitely ask you about that on the test. So that was a lot of information, but this slide, what I mean to do with this slide is sort of demystify it for you that the coding part is important, but this is platform developer. It's like being a developer is a lot more than just writing code. It's knowing, it's knowing how to do a SQL query. It's understanding the order of execution, what tools are available for me for debugging and deployment. What are the building blocks of this here, Lightning components and LWCs? Why would you use those? And then again, just other general things here at the top, security, platform events, just all the other things that are available. So I hope that while this maybe expands in your mind what's involved in the test, that it demystifies it a little bit, that these are just concepts that you need to learn, that it's not all about coding. So resources, and I need to update this slide, but this is how I approached it, like just to even start. So I was accepted into Rad Women Code. That again was the catalyst for me to just realizing that I could understand this. And in Rad Women Code, they don't cover all of the PD1 concepts. Their mission is to decrease the gender gap in, for developers, to encourage women and to help women become developers. That's really their goal. So they talk about mostly that second rung where it is just learning about data types. You're writing a couple of triggers and a couple of test classes. That's what you cover in Rad Women Code. But it gave me the catalyst to go, okay, I can do this. For a lot of people who don't have that opportunity and they're just like, I don't even know where to begin. I think that David Liu's Apex Academy is perfect because he takes you through very simply writing your first trigger. It's like hello world trigger. And it starts to get you comfortable with, oh, I can do this. I can write a trigger. It's not rocket science, and starts to break down what some of the parts of a trigger are. And that right there is going to help you build your confidence. Like, okay, I've got some motivation here. My mindset is I can take this on. Let's move forward. So that's a good starting point. This was when Dreamforce was more in person, but there's always presentations recorded available from Dreamforce events. Now they're all on Salesforce Plus, and other virtual meetings, presentation recordings. If you're on Twitter or LinkedIn or you belong to a community group, you're going to learn about these. And so that's a great place to just get exposure. I went to meetings where I had no idea what they were talking about, but I just listened. And don't be afraid that you don't understand it. It's okay. Go to the developer user group meetings and be there. It's intimidating because you may not know what they're talking about, but I have found that afterwards, if I ask somebody a question about it, they are more than happy to explain it very basically to me. And there's no judgment there, that you're not a developer and you don't know everything they're talking about. I found everyone to be really approachable. So don't be afraid to go to things where you don't really even understand what they're talking about. As you do that and you continue to go to those, concepts are going to start together, come together. The puzzle is going to start in your head to start to come together, and you'll be exposed to the same thing over and over, and you'll start to realize how that fits together. Rad Women Code uses a website called Women Code Heroes, and it's an awesome site to start breaking down what are data types, what are variables, how does this all work together. It's very basically written in like plain language, and it's perfect for you to, again, gain that confidence that you can start to understand what these things are. And again, a lot of this is going to help with flows too. So those are sort of the 3 places where I'm like, how to kickstart this, how to even take that first step forward. Then, so obviously not everyone can do Rad Women Code, and also it's a little harder to get into now, but Rad Women Code, I highly recommend that. Ladies Be Architects, if you've heard of them, they have a playlist called Platform Developer Study Group. It's probably about 3 years old now, but it's maybe 6 different sessions that at one time they had a study group and they went through all of the material. So it's a perfect resource to go through and listen to that. Trailhead Live has gotten a lot better, and they have a lot of modules from experts at Salesforce talking about different concepts in the PD1 framework. Just focusing on Sockle or focusing on, I don't know, just some of the other different small chunks. Definitely check out Trailhead Live. They keep recordings, you can search. Perfect resource. I didn't really use it at the time, but now I see how helpful that would have been. Apex Hours, another resource. They have so many YouTube videos out there, and I believe they have a platform developer playlist. They dive really deep into a lot of the really technical stuff, and so that's a great resource to just get exposure. And again, you may have to come back. You may watch it and think, I don't really fully understand what they're talking about. I need to go do some hands-on. I'm going to come back, but they're a great resource. Focus on Force has always been my go-to when studying for exams. With Platform Developer 1, I used it as more of a framework to be like, okay, here's the list of things that I need to understand. They do a really good job of breaking down some of the concepts, and they have really good graphics to help you understand them. But I definitely had to go outside Focus and Force to some of these other resources to definitely study. But it was a good framework, because if you just look at the exam guide, which you should look at the exam guide, you know, it has a list of things, but you're not sure where to go with it. They're pretty high level topics. So Focus on Force helps break down and gives you a framework for sort of taking on the journey. So let's see. Then Trailhead, of course. I will tell you that just diving in and doing some of the Apex trails was confusing for me. You know, they kind of explain it. Then you have a what do you call those things? Thing that you have to do. Can't think of what the word is right now. Challenge. And then it doesn't work. And then you don't know what to do. And you're going in and you're like, am I missing a semicolon somewhere in this? And it gets a little frustrating. So Trailhead's definitely a place to go, but don't get frustrated. And if you're having problem on one, feel free to reach out to someone. And I'll talk about a mentor to help you understand what you're doing wrong. Don't let that frustrate you. But just know, if you go into Trailhead and you just start diving head on into the Apex ones, it can be frustrating for some people, and I don't want that to deter you. We probably all know their Salesforce has certification days, where they spend a couple of hours sort of reviewing the topics in a certification. I found for PD1 that is better towards the end of your study journey. If you take it first thing, it's not really going to stick. They go over it really high level. It's not going to stick, and it may overwhelm you. So I would do it at the end, sort of as validation that you've covered everything you need to cover, and maybe you're ready for the test. That's my personal recommendation. Salesforce does have a boot camp, and they do have a course, a week-long course on you know, the topics that are part of this. It costs some money. If your company was willing to pay for it, it would be awesome, because you'd have a teacher teaching you these things instead of having to self-study. So that is an option. And then generally, this last section here I'll talk about is the idea that it's not a linear journey. You're going to need to sort of put your foot out there, go to some developer webinars, maybe go to a developer user group and just start listening to some of the concepts that they're talking about. You may not even know what questions to ask, but you're going to be exposed to the topics that they discuss. So there's local user groups. There's certainly virtual if you're on Twitter or LinkedIn, or there's some other resources where you can find this information. You can find out about virtual groups like this that you can attend. And now we all know that worldwide they're open to anybody. So I know there's things like they're talking about SOCL, or maybe we're talking about Lightning Web Components. Just start going to those and just listening to the concepts. That's going to help things come together. There are virtual user groups like WIT Devs, Women in Tech Devs. They haven't had a meeting in a couple of months, but that is one of the groups that I belong to and I go to. And again, sometimes I don't fully understand the topic, but gaining exposure to it is definitely helpful. And then these last two parts. Okay, so I took platform developer twice. I didn't pass the first time. So I do want to emphasize that a lot of people don't pass the first time. So don't be afraid to take it. Don't get that paralysis of, I don't know enough. I'm not going to schedule it. I'm not going to schedule it. I'm going to keep putting it off. At some point, you have to just sort of bite the bullet and go take the test. And sort of two things will happen. Maybe you'll pass it. Maybe it's not as hard as you think it is, or maybe you know more than you think you do. But you'll take it and you'll understand the framework of the test and what they're asking you. So you'll likely gain some confidence from that. I actually gained confidence when I passed it. I was like, oh, I can do this. But I see where I'm deficient in a few areas that I need to go and look. LWCs was one of them. I sort of studied it very, very, very cursorily initially, and I realized I needed to deep dive into that. So what I did after the first time, and I hadn't done before, is I went back and I read all of the documentation. Salesforce has all of these developer guides. And what I found, and I was so surprised, was that it's very digestible. It's not technical. They lay it out in layman's terms. And as I read it, I saw a lot of the questions that were on the test. It's all covered in the documentation. So reading that, I highly recommend. It might seem a little dry to go through and read it, but that was 100% the key for me passing it the second time. Also, Twitter, I didn't put LinkedIn in here. LinkedIn, not as much. LinkedIn doesn't go into some of the concepts as much as like maybe people do on Twitter. There's Ohana Slack, and there's some other Slack channels. And there's also a Salesforce Discord channel where you can monitor it, see what people are talking about. Again, that's exposure. And also, especially on Slack and Discord, ask your questions. Say, I don't really understand what this particular concept is. Can somebody help explain it to me? And you're going to find somebody who explains it to you in a way that you can understand it. Kind of like an explain it like I'm five situation. That's what my mentor did for me. She broke it down. A lot of the things with classes and with some of the controllers, she would talk about, okay, I have animals. You have the animal kingdom, and then you have certain species. And then she broke it down that way for me, which sounds very much like a kindergarten way, but is what really helps me understand it. So these type of resources, definitely utilize them and ask your questions. Don't be afraid to ask your questions, because it's really going to help you gain that understanding. So sort of the summary of the slide is the resources are out there. You just need to find out which ones work for you and gain exposure. So I hope that this slide helps you understand, like, where do you even go to take that first step to even start your journey. So the fourth sort of guidepost that I like to emphasize is mentor. I was super, super lucky that I worked with a senior software engineer who was a friend of mine, and she became my mentor. When I didn't understand something, I would schedule time with her and she would sit down with me and explain it. That's not necessarily available to everyone, but it made me realize the importance of that. So what's the role of a mentor? Sometimes I'll have people come to me and say, you know, what's the best resource for me to do this? Where can I go where I'm going to find the information that's going to come into my head? Like, people want a class, they want it to be presented to them. Who's going to tell me all of this PD1 information? And I'm here to tell you, no one is going to tell you all of it. It's absolutely a self-study situation. You have to seek it out and be proactive and learn it. There's plenty of resources out there. And so a mentor isn't there to be your teacher. to say, okay, today we're going to talk about the order of execution and let me lay this all out for you. Mentor generally isn't going to have time for that. They have their own job, and it's not really going to stick with you if you go to the mentor and just say, okay, give me a class on this. For me, what I think the role of a mentor is that your responsibility is to go and try to understand information. Go do some trailheads, go to a virtual seminar, do focus on force, and try to understand it. And then when you get to a point where you've tried and you don't understand something, then you can go to the mentor and ask them very specific questions. And they'll appreciate the fact that you've done some work up front and you understand some of the context and you've identified where you're having problem understanding, and then they can help you understand that particular point. That's for me where the mentor was the most helpful. Where to find a mentor is a good question. I was super lucky that I worked with somebody who was willing to do it. If you work with the development team or a development lead, don't be afraid to ask them. But again, respect their time and come to them with specific questions. Don't expect them to just explain huge concepts to you. Have specific questions. They'll respect that and want to try to help you. If you don't work with developers, definitely look to see if you have a developer user group locally or even virtually. Believe me, everyone involved is super willing to help you answer questions, as well as on the social media. So Twitter, people will answer questions on Twitter. Of course, Trailhead, the Trailhead chatter groups, people will answer questions there, especially the answers section. And also, social media and Slack, that's what I was going to say, Slack and Discord. You can ask specific questions there. I've even seen people say, hey, I'll get on the phone with you for 20 minutes and explain this to you. So don't be afraid to reach out, and don't feel like any of your questions are stupid, because we've all started from ground one. So you may be like, oh, I don't want to ask about this. Like everybody else knows this, and maybe it's just me that I'm just not understanding this. Maybe this isn't for me. Don't be afraid to reach out to people you work with in the community, on social media, because they're all there to help, and we want everybody to be successful. So I think for me, the mentor was what sort of kept me going, because I ran into several concepts. I couldn't understand. I could understand them theoretically, but I didn't understand, like, how would you use that in real life? Like, why would you ever do that? And my mentor was able to explain to me, oh, well, we had this case where we had to do this, and that's why we did it. And understanding the context of it is what really, really helped me. So I definitely encourage everyone to find some sort of mentor or mentorship to sort of keep them going. So here is where I sort of return to the idea that PD1 is not just for developers. It will help with any role. So at any time, I covered like maybe 3 of these different roles. I worked as an admin, I worked as a project manager, and now as an architect. And I've seen firsthand how passing this certification has leveled up my career. So as an admin, I think admins are awesome. And maybe you want to be a senior admin. They have a huge role in a lot of companies. You don't want to be the developer. You don't want to be the architect. You want to be the admin. You want to have that control. Or maybe you want to be a product owner. Getting PD1 is super helpful, because it's going to help you with those decisions of clicks versus code. You're going to understand when code should be the way you go. It's really going to help you with troubleshooting and debugging. Somebody opens a case and says, this isn't working right. Understanding order of execution and some of the debugging tools, that's really going to help you as an admin. And generally just providing support. The more you know about the platform, the better you're going to be able to provide support. As a project manager, this really helped me as a project manager. Again, there's some people who that's their career path. You want to be a project manager. You don't want to be the person doing the hands-on keyboard. You don't want to be the developer or the architect. But going through PD1 helped me understand the complexity of solutions and the resource time. So I would do technical write-ups and I'd hand it over to the developers to get an estimate of time. And it would be like what I considered a simple trigger. And they would say, oh, that's going to be 5 hours. And I was like, how can that take you 5 hours? I don't understand. Why is that so difficult? Going through PD1, understanding what's involved, understanding the test classes and everything you have to run through really helped me better develop that relationship with the developers and understand what they were doing. I'm presenting them with this. I'm the project manager. I'm responsible for resource allocation and time frames, and it really helps me understand that. It also definitely helped me ask questions and challenge. I don't know if challenge is the right word, but just say, is that the right thing? Like, I see you're doing this, but that's not really what we want to achieve. Is this the right way to go? Nobody knows everything. So it's important to sort of have that back and forth when you're talking about a solution so that you get to the best solution. So I was able to actually feel more confident asking questions as a project manager. Of course, as an architect, it's a necessary body of knowledge to have. You don't have to be a developer, but you have a deeper involvement in the solutioning and brainstorming. You can, from square one, understand, like, how are we going to solution this? Is it clicks? Is it code? And if it is code, what makes sense? Maybe you want to do an invocable method instead of a trigger, or how are you putting this together? You're going to understand the code solutions that are being discussed, and you're going to be able to propose solutions and understand their impact. So certainly with things like order of execution, that type of thing, you're going to be able to, from this ground floor, suggest a solution by having this information. And then, of course, as a developer, my opinion is getting through PD1, you're on your way. I don't personally consider PD1 to be like, oh, I passed PD1, I'm a developer, everything's awesome, because it's just not deep enough to me to just then say, oh, I'm going to go get a job as a developer. I don't think it's enough hands-on work to do that, but it's the first step. It's a solid foundation on Salesforce tools and best practices. So I've worked with developers who are developers outside of Salesforce, and they come to Salesforce and they're like, well, I can do this, it's just code. I think we all know that with Salesforce, it's really important to understand the platform. Just the limits and how Salesforce does things and what are the best practices. As a developer, you need to have that foundation. And then if you're starting out as a developer, it's giving you that hands-on work. So this slide's really important to me because it's like, here's why PD1's important. All these areas, this is why it's important. And it's not just about coding, it's about more deeply understanding the Salesforce platform. I think that might be it. And that I guess is the, in conclusion, I guess I'll say, I think the main points that I've hopefully made are, definitely have that mindset and motivation. It's not going to be linear. It's not just going to be checking things off. Stay the course, stick with it, have faith that things will start to make sense as you have exposure and start putting these things together. Another point is, it's not all about the coding. Don't be intimidated. There are definitely coding questions. You're going to have to interpret some code and define what it does, and it's tricky. It might depend on where a comma is in the code that's going to do one thing or the other. Like, the questions are tricky, I'm not going to lie. But the test involves a whole other, lots of other areas of knowledge. So be comfortable that you can understand this other stuff and then sort of build your coding knowledge. And then lots of resources, and don't be afraid to leverage the community, mentors, other people. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. So I really hope that this has sort of demystified it a little bit for you, and also provided you with some motivation that everybody, no matter where they are in their journey, can definitely take that first step forward towards PD1 certification.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. This is really awesome, Janet. And I really love the list of resources that you have shared. It's so exhaustive. And also your suggestions about the mentorship. And my personal suggestion about mentorship is, if you found somebody who is one step or two steps ahead of you, don't hesitate to reach out to them and get their suggestions. And I personally receive a lot of requests like this, and I'm open and I connect with them one-on-one and try to help in whatever way possible. And this year, I have helped many people who have reached out to me. The same way, there are this community, the Salesforce community is full of so many wonderful people. So if you reach out to somebody for help, you are sure to get the help from them. So feel free to reach out to anybody who is one step ahead of you, whom you think they would be able to help you in your journey. Just ask it out. And,
Definitely. Oh, go ahead.
So the session recording will be uploaded, and I will also include any links to the resources that we have shared here if I find anything additional. I'm going to include them in the description section of the video. And please go ahead, Janet. I'm done.
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm typing in here. Let me just finish typing this and I'll include this link. So my WIT group is doing a PD1 mentoring session on the 14th. And I've brought in my mentor, who's like the greatest person of explaining things of all time. She's awesome. And I put the link here if anybody wants to join. The idea behind this session isn't like we're going to do an overview of PD1. It's like, okay, you're studying, you've come across something that you don't understand. We have a form to submit the question, and then we're going to address that question during the session. So if you can't find a mentor, we're here to help you, answer those questions for things that are vague.
That's a great initiative, Janet. I'm sure this will be helpful to many people.
Yeah, so feel free to connect with me on social or reach out. I'm not the best mentor on technical items, explaining them to you, but I can definitely point you in the right direction.
And in the chat, I see some questions.
Oh, let's see. I think there was a question up there.
Yeah,
Hold on.
how
Let's see.
important is understanding Apex in getting ready for PD1?
So that's key. That's definitely that. If we go back to that slide where I had the different layers, once you understand your declarative, your clicks, understanding Apex is definitely a 25%. I don't know. I'm sort of guessing here. You're not going to pass it if you can't look at a chunk of code. Not complex. It's not some API integration and really complex. The code chunks are, in theory, sort of simple, but they're going to put something in there that is going to either throw an error, it's going to run into a limit, or it's going to be successful. Or the other thing they do is, what's the output? Like, there's going to be an output on this. Is it a number? What's the output going to be? That's what you need to understand about the code, the components of it, and then like what it's going to do. So it's pretty key to understand Apex.
And there's one more question. I think I can answer that. How relevant is PD1 to a Marketing Cloud admin or developer's role? So the Marketing Cloud development, there is a different set of languages that were used in Marketing Cloud development side. That is the SSJS and the GTL and the AppScript. And the Salesforce development, it mostly focuses on the Apex and Lightning Web Components and so on. So you don't need to be a Salesforce developer to be a good developer in the Marketing Cloud. These two are completely different languages. So you don't need to be an expert in one to be an expert in the other one.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I know nothing about marketing. Maybe I need to learn, but I don't. So that's super awesome that you can provide that insight.
And
looks like there's another question about LWC. Again, when I took it, I looked at the documentation, and there was, I'll give this information to JB when I'm done. There was a site that I used that really went over it's a Salesforce site. I can't think of what it's called now, where it went over the different components of it and what they do, and you were able to build sample ones right in that environment. That's what I did. I didn't dive into it heavy. Again, it's why I didn't pass the first time, is there was questions about LWCs that I didn't get right. And I went back and just studied it a little bit more. So you don't need to be able to write one from scratch. You just need to understand why they're used, what are the different components, and you can get all of that from the documentation and a little bit of hands-on.
That's a great answer, Janet. Thank you. I think those are all the questions that we have. And thank you once again for the wonderful session. And once again, a reminder about the upcoming meeting in the Sacramento user group, Salesforce Saturday, right? So Janet has shared that link in the chat window. Please register to that and to get more help from that session. And
yeah, we're happy to answer any specific questions there.
Yeah. And we will be sharing the recording on the YouTube channel, Trailblazing Together. And the next session coming from the Impact 4 series is about the inspiring stories from few trailblazing women. That's going to be on January 8th around the same time. I will be sharing the link, posting the event shortly. Please don't miss to register to that event. and wish you all good luck in your PD1 certification journey. And any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Janet.
Perfect. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Janet. Thanks, everyone. You have a good day. Bye.